Alrighty, let's talk about second semester RC classes. RC stands for Required Curriculum, and it's also what we call the first year students. EC is second year, when we get to choose elective classes, hence the acronym EC for Elective Curriculum. Anyway, this semester we have a full lineup of 7 classes. If that sounds like a lot, you'd be right. But I'm going to break them all down in this video and compare the experience to last semester's classes. The good news is that 2 of the classes are basically pass-fail, and the other 5 have the same grading structure: 50% participation and 50% other, like a final, quant quizzes, project, etc. So let's start off with my most challenging class, Finance 2. Fin 2 focuses on the right side of the balance sheet, so equity and debt, whereas Fin 1 focused on the left side, aka the assets. And as predicted, assets are way easier to conceptualize than equity and debt. Not gonna lie, this class is very challenging for me. Discounted cash flows are now the basic math of the past, and I feel like I'm now reading a language I don't understand. Even with the numbers sprinkled in, I decay what those numbers mean. But the only numbers I'm really concerned about is that 50% of my grade will come from participation and the other 50% from the final. We also have some ungraded quizzes to help facilitate learning as well. The main upside to this class is that our professor is amazing. Very rarely does the entire section have the same opinion about a professor, but this is the first time so far that all my section mates agree that our professor is not just amazing at teaching, but also absolutely endearing. The next class is called Big E, Business, Government, and the International Economy. This class is interesting. It's a blend of technical economic concepts with the storytelling of each economy or policy we read about. For someone who hasn't taken an economics or history class since high school, this class is sometimes hard for me to follow. The case method is a really unstructured way of teaching economics, and I have found that the concepts are a little hard to grasp. I do enjoy the stories and the cases, though, and talking about how various countries have risen from the ashes by doing various monetary and fiscal policies. Speaking of policies, the grading policy is 50% participation, 10% from the midterm, and 40% from the final. Oh, and these cases are by far the longest of the bunch. They could each be a textbook. And the exhibits are beastly. Honestly, I'm so impressed by how knowledgeable my section mates are. We have some very passionate historians in the class. Because Biggie covers such a large range of topics, a lot of knowledge from outside the case is also brought in from our resident historians or diverse international students who share their experiences. And of course, HBS has a lot of economics majors too, and they're doing their best to explain these concepts to us. So, big shout out to them for carrying the class on their shoulders. We also had a class called Purpose of the Firm. Yes, had, because we finished all 7 sessions in the first week of school. That was brutal. That week we had to clear 13 cases, and an average week has 10 cases. But this class was also very interesting because we dove in to talk about if it is the responsibility of a firm or the government to fill in gaps in basic needs of a country. Like, why are there water companies? And does the end justify the means? This was really interesting because we learned that businesses are allowed to take on risk and fail, but governments aren't given the same ability to fail. So, how should we think about the role of firms and governments in society? Anyway, because this was such a short class, this class was pass fail. And also because it was such a short class, I feel like the professor did not have enough time to iron out his calling pattern. So this class constantly felt like Hunger Games to get a comment in. And the professor naturally had a penchant for calling one area of the room more than others. The newest addition to the second semester class lineup is a class we call DSAIL. This stands for Data Science and AI for Leaders. This course was the most disliked class last year when HBS first introduced it. However, as the world grapples with what to do with AI and businesses are kind of left in this middle ground to self-govern themselves, I think DSAIL is actually a really important class. It teaches us why it is important for leaders to understand the technology, and DSAIL encourages us to play with all the tools, which HBS does give us licenses for. ESAIL helps us answer very important questions about hiring, governance, adoption, and AI ethics in a world that both fears AI and is trying to use it to drive profitability. We get to talk about questions such as: should we trust healthcare recommendations from doctors who use AI? Can AI be better than the average doctor? How do we know that the diagnostic data fed into the AI is the truth? Are false positives or false negatives worse? And for which stakeholders? How is the class graded? Well, that answer is easy: 50% participation and 50% project. IDK what the project entails quite yet, but I assume it's a project we have to do leveraging a bunch of AI tools to build proficiency. Sometimes this class gives me a little PTSD because we study companies who have tried and failed to implement digital solutions, and it just brings me back to how hard it was for me to drive and scale digital transformation in my previous role. Another interesting class we have is called the Entrepreneurial Manager, or TEM. I'll admit that I like Tom more than Tem, but I guess it's just because I like organization and structure and process, and being on an entrepreneurial journey doesn't really have a lot of those attributes. In this class, we learn really practical things like the types of funding you can get and the restrictions and stipulations they come with. And we also discuss things like: do passion for the project or the diversity of the founding team matter? We get to see a lot of successful and failed startups, meet with the founders and case protagonists, and attempt to gain as much structure as possible when you're trying to pursue the unstructured career of entrepreneurship. Luckily, the grading is structured: 50% participation, 10% quant quizzes, and 40% final exam. 50% of HBS grads found something within 15 years of graduating. I don't know about you, but that percentage sounds really high, and it's probably because HBS equips us with 10. And my favorite class so far is LCA, Leadership and Corporate Accountability. This class feels like an extension of the latter part of FRC, which was Financial Reporting and Controls, when we talked about internal controls and fraud. So in LCA, we started talking about fraud, and then not just our fiduciary duties to shareholders, but also our responsibilities to stakeholders. This class is all about how to make decisions in gray areas, being responsible to not just the investors and the board and compliant with regulators, but also doing what is best for our customers, employees, and society. I think my main takeaway here is that there's a very big difference between following the law and being responsible. The law is the floor, the minimum, but leaders are held to a higher standard than the law. Anyway, something interesting is that so far half the cases have mentioned Texas. There's Enron, there's Theranos, there was another oil and gas company. So I'm convinced that LCA has a vendetta against Texas. But I promise, Texas is a great place to live. Anyway, the grading is 50% participation, 10% quizzes, and 40% final exam. The last class is arguably the coolest ever. It's our capstone class called Field. As you know, we have a lot of cases and they all have protagonists. Well, except the cases in two classes, I guess FRC and LCA have antagonists. Anyway, Field is our chance to be the protagonist. HBS ships us off to one of 14 cities around the world to help a partner company with some problem. So, this is basically an international consulting job. We spend the semester preparing for a 10-day immersion, and I'm pretty sure this one is pass fail. HBS encourages us to go to a city that we have no connection with or have not been to before. We submit our preferences, and HBS does their best to match us with a city at the top of our priority list. Not much has happened in this class yet, but I'm really excited to get to learn about how business is done in a new culture and get to try my hand at it. All right, so those are the classes this semester. This semester is not only supposed to be more fun than first semester RC year, but it's also reportedly the most fun semester out of the 4 semesters we have. And so far, so good. Even though there are a lot of classes and I'm drowning in case prep, the case discussions are a lot more vibrant and full. I think these classes cover a larger range of topics compared to last semester's classes, and you can learn more about the first semester classes here. Those classes were not only a great foundation for business knowledge and intuition, but they also helped my section build trust amongst each other. So now, when we have classes with more touchy subjects like morals and beliefs, making decisions in gray areas, startup ideas and failures, we have the psychological safety to say what we really believe in class. knowing that no one will judge us or think less of us because our beliefs are different, and recognizing that we can all learn from each other. Even though there was some disagreement last semester on how the protagonist should have approached some decision, none of the decisions or content was very personal. Now, this semester, the conversations are venturing into what we think is right, what our morals are, how our actions are shaped by our beliefs, and defining what we think a good leader looks like in the worst situations possible. There would be so many more opportunities for fracturing and factioning had we not had the first semester to get to know each other on a deeper level. All I can say is that HBS knows what they're doing when they're building the curriculum. So, that's the all star lineup this semester. I'm really excited to continue learning and being challenged by all these classes. If you thought this breakdown of HBS's required classes was helpful or insightful into what HBS prioritizes equipping their students with, consider liking and subscribing. Well, I'm off to studying, so until next time, bye guys.